Sorry guys. Sorry. I'm trying to do this without videoing, not doing a great job. Okay. Children's growth and motor development. So this is the heaviest piece of the theory that we'll be doing this week. So changes that happen early in a child's life and the movement, cognitive, and affective development are key to early learning. So as they grow, moving from creeping, crawling to standing to moving along furniture and then walking on their own, eventually running, these are all development of fundamental movement skills. So the muscular growth and development that occurs with this, once they come to us, they're the 5 to 6 year olds in kindergarten. So this is a time of incredibly rapid muscle growth in the size of tissue. And so what you want to think about is, like, this is not the time for fitness testing, and I know that sounds ridiculous, but it happens. It's not the time for fitness testing. It's the time for them to begin to understand, now that my muscles have grown this much, what's going on with my muscles? 7 to 12 years, it's a bit slower, it's gradual, it's continuous, and the muscle tissue almost doubles. And that's when it needs to be exercised. That's when we're looking at like muscular fitness training. Boys are slightly stronger than girls between ages 5 and 12. So there are some social factors to consider in your planning for your upper elementary years. So factors that affect growth and development: nutrition. As you know, we have a new Canada Food Guide that has recently come out. And so this is something you can look at with your students. The 4 food groups are not there necessarily anymore. You can still talk about them, but more talking about how to eat, when to eat, what to eat, thinking about snacks in class, that kind of thing. Exercise is critical at this stage for bone density improvement and muscular improvement, and geography and climate. They seem to affect normal growth patterns. So you're going to want to think about your December babies and your September babies and how different they are. So especially kindergarten 1, 2, you're going to see very large physical differences. Motor learning is the dynamic process of development through the combination of physical and psychological factors that affect the ability of one to perform a task. So motor skill development is a change in that. So it's a result of growth, maturation, and learning. So this one is divided into 3 phases. So as we develop our motor skills, there's 3 phases to this: the cognitive, the associative, and then the autonomous. Cognitive phase. This is where you really still have to think about what you're doing. So as you're learning to ride a bike, for example, you can watch them. They really have to think, okay, I have to pedal, push, push, push. Then they have to think, oh my goodness, I have to look up where I'm going. At the same time, I have to balance. So they are really questioning what they're doing. It's uncoordinated, it's tentative, they're hesitant. It takes them lots and lots and lots and lots of tries. Most are not successful. They're not consistent in their movements, and you can almost see their brains thinking. So when you're teaching students who are in this cognitive phase, here are the implications for teaching. You need very clear explanations. With demonstration is even better. They need lots of practice opportunity, and they need to concentrate on only 1 or 2 components. So if we're talking about throwing, they need only 2 teaching cues for throwing, like point to your target, follow through. Feedback is critical in the cognitive phase, but it has to be feedback that they can understand about their form. So we're not talking accuracy or speed if we're talking about throwing. We're talking about stand sideways, point to the target, step, throw, follow through. And ideally, we'd be using activities that are simple, cooperative, and fun. The associative phase, so this is like your middle elementary years, they're now able to self-check for errors. They're less concentrated on like each isolated movement. So if we're looking back to riding a bike, now they're focusing less on the pedaling. Pedaling is almost in that autonomous or automatic phase. And maybe there's a little bit of thought about balancing, but only because they're now steering all over the place and challenging themselves, and they're using internal cues to begin to refine the skill of riding a bike. They also, at this time, they really want to be engaged in problem solving. So they want to use targets, or they want to use other cues to begin to refine the skill. You'll see that they're more successful and that their practice attempts are much more consistent. So implications for teaching here. Leveled practices, which means scaffolding. So you would have a station that's fairly easy, then maybe a medium station, and then a little bit harder. So you really want to think about whatever it is you're practicing, how can you adapt it or change it or modify it, or how can students adapt, change, or modify it for different levels. Coaching cues are important, so talking about teaching cues with the students in student-friendly language. Eventually they're going to get up to speed, and you need short practice sessions with many breaks or many changes. Small groups, again, we're focusing on form, and you want to think like one ball for all. So everybody needs a ball or implement in those small groups, so everyone should be maximum participation. And there are going to still be individual differences despite chronological similarities. So yes, whatever, everyone is, 5 and 6 in kindergarten, but that doesn't mean they're going to look the same. The automatic phase, this is more your grade 3, 4, 5, 6, depending on the activity. This happens after lots and lots of practice. It's not the final stage of motor learning, because we are all on a physical literacy journey. We're always learning to move based on how our bodies change and adapt over lifetimes. But this looks more habitual, it looks more automatic. So it looks effortless. They're not really a conscious attention. So this is where, once they're in an automatic phase of a movement skill, they can then begin to play more games, more bigger-sided games, and apply those skills in different places and spaces. So you practice for form, style, and accuracy. You can analyze it together in partners, small groups, video, iPads, whatever, and they can have those conversations now. And you want to increase the variety and intensity of your practicing. So we want to consider time sensitive, or be considerate of sensitive times of development. So thinking about this, as a teacher, what are some sensitive times of development you might face? So this is one of those things like in your journals, your reflective practice journals. If you jot down these questions as we're going through them, just jot down some ideas. So what might you face as a teacher? How should this influence your PE instruction? So if you are in grade 3, you might be seeing students who are still in the cognitive phase, associative phase, and some who are in the automatic phase. How are you going to apply this to your PE instruction? Language acquisition. If you were teaching in English and they are primarily English-speaking students, is this necessarily something you need to consider? If they are second language learners, whether that's English, French, Cree, Spanish, Anishinaabe, whichever, you've got to really think about language acquisition alongside the physical development. And is everything you're doing developmentally appropriate? What phase do you think your students are in? And how can you make sure the activity is the just right amount of challenge for them? And then looking back on those 3 phases, was anything missing in these phases and theories that maybe as a class when we do come together we need to talk about? So these are some sample posters of stages of motor development. And so this is based on a striking activity. It looks like striking with a bat. So in the initial stage, they're going to chop. Like it'll look very choppy. There's some if-then. So if they're having difficulty watching the incoming object, then ask them to make or watch an X marked on the ball, or change the color of the ball, the size of the ball. Okay? In stage 2-3, where they're emerging, so this is very cognitive. This is a little bit more associative. What are some teaching points that you can use with your students? And then there's some if-thens. Once they're into that autonomous or automatic stage, your teaching points become very, very, very specific. And so what you might want to do is now focus on accuracy and speed in the mature or autonomous stage. These posters are available online. I believe I've put them on eClass as well, with all kinds of different fundamental movement skills. So like this one, I know it's cut off on your screen, is manipulative or striking. You're just zooming in on this piece. There's also one for running, so really watching how kids run, and so on and so forth. So now I'd like for you to pause this video to watch, or pause my video to click on and check out this. Once you're done watching that, what I want you to take away from that is that those are children who are very much still in the cognitive and associative phase of running and movement. I find that video funny because they're also very, very isolated in their learning. They don't learn from the mistakes of others. You can see that as they each trip on the tent lip, none of them notice to pick up their feet because they're so cognitive of just looking where they're going, not paying attention to their surroundings. Even just putting one foot in front of the other is difficult, let alone putting one foot in front of the other and stepping over the tent. So just something kind of silly and funny, but also really important to think about in our teaching. All right, principles of learning motor skills. There are 7 principles. So on eClass, what I've challenged you to do is come up with a way for us to remember one principle or all the principles, whether that's a song, a picture, a skit, any kind of takeaway that we can share to help each other remember these 7 principles, because they are a part of your midterm and final. So there's the learning piece, but then once you've learned it, let's get that out of the way. Don't worry about the marks. Let's actually focus on what implication it has for teaching. So let's go through the 7 principles, and either before or after, most likely after, come up with a way for us to remember, and we'll teach it to each other. So principles of interest. This is 110% cognitive and affective. So this is all about head and heart. Are they even interested in what it is you're about to teach them? And so what you want to think about is appropriate activities. Is it intrinsically valuable? A lot of you in your expectations talked about meaning, which is fantastic. So how is whatever you're about to do meaningful to your students? That meets the principle of interest when they're going to be learning a motor skill. And how successful can they be? And can they see improvement? That will keep their interest. Principle of practice. So it's necessary to practice to acquire motor skills, but what's more important than the practice time is the feedback, which can be terrifying if you're not a phys ed specialist. So if you don't know all the teaching cues for running, skipping, hopping, jumping, don't stress. There are resources available, and I will show them to you when we are all together with teaching cues that you can use to stress the proper form and repeat over and over and over again to move from that cognitive phase to the associative phase. So principle of interest, principle of practice. Principle of distributed practice. Sorry about the chair noise. So this means short periods of concentrated practice. So lots of activities, not too long, but very focused on the main point of the activity. So for example, if you were working on a striking unit, you would have short periods of kicking, you would have short periods of batting, you might have short periods of using a racket to just keep a shuttle in the air. But you want to allow time and space for repetitions, but also breaks from that specific skill as they rotate through the different stations. This way, you're avoiding boredom and fatigue, and poor skill development because they get bored or fatigued, they don't try as hard and they don't think about what they're doing. Principle of skill specificity. So there's specific differences between each of the skills, and just because somebody's really good in one doesn't mean that they will be successful in the other. So again, this is where that just right challenge comes in. So varied activities at grade levels, thinking about, do they all have to do this quickly, or can you slow it down? And then individual standards. So if you talk about the teaching cues, maybe some students are going to be able to meet 2 out of the 5 teaching cues. Maybe some are going to get 5 out of the 5. So allow for those individual standards. Principle of whole part learning. So it's really important to think big picture, the whole movement, and then micro pieces of the big picture, breaking it into parts. So the single function movement, that's like the whole, so throwing. The complex skill of throwing can be broken down into small pieces. Stand sideways to your target. Point to your target. Step towards your target. Release at the highest point. Oh, hang on. Sorry guys. Release at the highest point. Step, follow through. So, breaking those things from whole part. Principle of transfer. This one is more about like the effect of practicing one motor skill might carry over to others. This really works like in striking. This works well in like leaping, skipping, hopping, doing those in track and field or in gymnastics. And again, we have to think about the transferability for each student and their individual needs. Principles of feedback. So again, it can be somewhat intimidating as a non-specialist, but feedback's going to come from inside and outside. So in your activity planning, you always over-plan, but know that you need to give students enough time and space for individual feedback. That's you giving them feedback. Peer feedback, teacher feedback, individual feedback is them, hitting the target. That's automatic individual feedback. Hey, look, I am accurate. Peer feedback, student to student, and teacher feedback. With a clear understanding of the goals and teaching cues, feedback can be acquired individually with peers or teachers. So videos are effective. It's intermittent feedback. So feedback, walk away, give them time to practice, come back. So to give feedback, you want to be specific to the teaching cues and the understanding of the goal, understanding goals, and give some feedback, walk away, let them practice. So we're going to stop this one here, and then we'll come back.